I'm actually kicking off a series on the book of James, but we're going straight into chapter 2 because John couldn't face basically talking on giving from the book of James. So although Matt had put it down in the preaching program, the first bit of James 1 and then James 2 going into the first bit of James 1 going into the first bit of James 2, John basically refused and did his own thing. So I'm actually going to kick off a series slightly halfway through. So I'm going to give a little bit of background because I know that we all love a little bit of background about books in the Bible that we read, because otherwise we don't understand them in their context, do we? So let's give ourselves a little James refresher. So who wrote it? Well, the clue is in the name, James. That's easy. And again, he doesn't give us any more details. Paul often introduces himself in different ways, an apostle. He just says, kind of, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, which makes theologians and most of us think that he was kind of well known, a bit like Oprah. You know, you don't need to give any more details, do you, if you're James? So that sort of narrows it down to two Jameses. There's a James, anyway, but the other one was actually dead by the time this book was written. So it whittles it down immediately to one James, which is James, the brother of Jesus. And he's named in Mark 6:3. So Mary and Joseph go on to have children of their own. And so Jesus, as we know, has like half brothers and sisters who sort of interact with him through the Gospels. Now, I don't know if you have siblings. How many people here have got siblings? How many? Yeah, most of us. And I don't know what it would be like to have your brother as the Messiah. That would be kind of strange, right? I mean, I love my sister. I really do love my sister. My sister's lovely. But I don't know how I'd cope if she was actually the Redeemer of the world. I think that'd be quite a strange thing to get your head around. And, you know, back in the olden days when we used to send out Christmas newsletters, I don't know if you ever received them, but I used to write them myself. And occasionally you'd have ones which would read something like this. Tommy's had such a nice year. He got straight A's in all subjects, is playing for the Arsenal under-17s, has a prophetic gift, and has set up and run a food bank in his spare time. And Fred does make us laugh. And you just think, Fred, mate, what's going on there? Poor Fred. So imagine Mary's letter. What is she going to write? She obviously didn't write one because she didn't do Christmas cards. But I'm just imagining. We're going in our imaginations here. Well, Jesus had a busy year, healing people, preaching across Galilee, calming storms, miraculously feeding thousands. And James, well, he has been doing really well with the jigsaw saw in the carpenter's shop. See, it used to feel a bit odd to be James, wouldn't it? I think. Anyway, and we do know that James and the rest of his brothers were fairly skeptical when Jesus started doing more Jesus-like things. So when if we will read in John 7:5, even his own brothers didn't believe him. And I don't actually think that's very surprising. I think that's fairly reasonable, to be honest. But what we see is this incredible sort of transformation of James from someone who's basically, Jesus, don't get above yourself. You're just like all the rest of us. Don't believe what you're doing. Stop it. Just stop it. To someone who is basically witnesses the crucifixion and then meets the risen Jesus. So he's listed as one of the people in Corinthians. He's listed as one of the people who meets Jesus, and he's also one of the people in the upper room waiting for the Spirit to be poured out in Pentecost. And then gradually through Acts, we see him sort of come into the leadership of the church. And so he obviously goes from thinking, my brother is a bit jumped up, to my brother is the Messiah, the Son of God. And that is quite a journey. If you're interested in it, you can read all the way through Acts, and it's quite interesting. We don't have time to do the whole thing now. I think that's a fairly good endorsement. If your brother has come to believe that you are the Son of God, I just think that says something quite powerful. Okay, so that's who wrote it. When did he write it? Probably AD 40 to 60, which for those of us will immediately pinpoint it as one of the first written books of the New Testament. So probably the Pauline letters wouldn't have been written down. They certainly wouldn't have been regarded as part of Scripture, because obviously in the time he wrote it, the New Testament didn't exist. So it's a very early book. Who did he write it to? Well, at the beginning, he said, I'm writing it to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. And kind of that sort of greeting, if you like, and also what we know about James as we read through the book of James means that we think it was probably, he's really having in mind a Jewish kind of Christian, the Jewish Christian people who were spread across the world, or across their known world. In chapter 1, James tells us that trials bring us closer to God, that God loves the poor and humbles the rich, that God doesn't play favorites, and that mercy triumphs over judgment. So that's what you missed over the last 2 weeks. That was easy, wasn't it? And now we're coming into this passage, which I'm going to read for you now, and if we can get it up on the screen, that'd be great. James 2:14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish person. Do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. I would say James is probably a person of action. I think that's fair enough summary. And he would probably be sort of shutting down the M25 now. I was thinking about it. What would he be doing if James was here? Probably. And he is, James is a kind of actions speak louder than words kind of person. And on Remembrance Sunday, of course, we remember the power of that we remember that there are people who have made the ultimate action, made the ultimate sacrifice in terms of protecting other people or, in service and in sacrifice. So James was a kind of a doer, kind of a person. He's very clear in this passage that he believes that faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. That's verse 17. He goes on to demolish the idea. You can almost hear him sort of hearing a critique of it, going that people had obviously maybe put into him as a sort of counterpoint. We all have different emphasis, James. You have your deeds. I have my faith. Let's all just follow our own path and, work it out. And I don't think James has a huge amount of time for that. In fact, he says, you foolish person. Do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? I'm not sure he's a very postmodern James. I think he's simply stating there is literally no point in saying you have faith if you are treating people so badly. Now, I have to confess that when I read a passage like this, something that stops me hearing some of the content of it is the tone of it. So it feels a little bit rude. It's a little bit rude, isn't it, James? Do you have to be quite so dismissive? I don't know about you, but I really don't like rudeness. It's kind of like it stops me listening to what you're going to say. If you're going to say it in a rude tone, I'm probably not going to hear it. I'm thinking of my life at home. And actually, I think James in John's framework, and if you've never heard John's framework, well, there isn't time to go into it now, but he just talks about we have these different drives in us, and one of these drives is truth-telling. So a truth teller is someone who kind of sees the truth with clarity. They can often be quite prophetic. They are very interested in authenticity, which is why they're very interested in actions. So, don't just say it, do it. Very important to them. And they will absolutely be able to see what is wrong or what is difficult about a situation, and often feel quite free to say it too. So that is a gift that they have from God, and I think that we need all of us with all our different gifts. But I think we really need truth tellers, and we need them. And for a happy truth teller to have a happy experience of church, then I think two things need to happen. First off, the truth teller needs to really hone Not just what they want to say, but how they say it and when they say it. And those things are actually really, really important, because sometimes we can know things about people, can't we? And we can think, I'm just not going to, this isn't quite the right time. So I would say a mature truth teller has got that. They've understood that it's not just enough to see the truth. I also have to have a mind for how I am going to say the truth and when I'm going to say the truth. So that's really important from their point of view. And if you would identify as a truth teller, you will already know that struggle. And you will know how God is changing and transforming you. But I also think the church, people who aren't truth tellers, people who kind of go, well, yes, but, it's probably fine. Or whatever our instinct is. Or don't be rude, that's a bit rude, that's a bit dismissive. Why would you say it like that? We have to be prepared to hear beyond the tone and go, I'm going to not get distracted by the way you are saying this, and I'm going to try and listen to the message that you're actually saying. Does that make sense? Yeah, I thought so. I thought it was an interesting insight. I was talking to my rabidly truth teller daughter about this yesterday, and she was just saying, it's really interesting that basically if people are prepared to hear what I say, even when it's a bit messy and it comes out kind of wrong, but I know they're going to listen, the need and the aggression with which I say it is really, really decreased. So actually, I'm probably likely to be a lot less critical if you let me be a little bit critical, if you see what I mean. If that makes sense. So we're trying to basically listen to what someone says. So in this context with James, I definitely think, when I looked at the passage, I was like, are you actually joking? But actually, we need to look beyond what, if you get offended, you might not get offended by the tone, but I definitely do, and think, what is James saying? What is he seeing? What's important about what he's doing? And what do I need to think about in terms of my life? So for James, in this context, he's talking about you can't say you're a Christian and then prefer the rich and basically ignore the poor. That just doesn't work. You can't do that. And there's various other things he's saying. This is really important that we do the right thing. And he would go so far as to say, as you can hear, that it's part of salvation, which I'm going to come on and address later. But for us, what is it? When someone looks at my life, would they go, oh yeah, you can talk it, you can say it, but how can I see it? How does it work out in practice? So with the things that I say, are they backed up by what I do? And I think that is always an uncomfortable but a really good challenge. We need to be able to say, where is it? Search me, see if there's any offensive way in me, because that's how we change. That's how we invite God in, and we invite God into the process, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit as well, but we get transformed. And if we don't do that, then we miss the challenge. So I think really important to hear the challenging truth tellers, even if we might find them a little bit annoying. And I think the other reflection that I had on this passage really is all about unity versus uniformity. When I was a Christian, I am a Christian, just for the record. Still am a Christian. When I was at university, which is a very, very long time ago, I was asked to lead a small group with someone who, a man who didn't believe that women should be able to lead or teach, didn't believe in the work of the Spirit, thought you shouldn't go to the cinema because it was, and that it was called sin-ema for a reason. It's true. And thought that women should dress very modestly, and I mean very modestly, and didn't like the fact that I wore short skirts. And I honestly, I just became like, when at school, when your mum says, if you're female, and you've got your school skirt on, and they'll have a look at it, and then you get out of the house and you roll it up on the waistband. Did you ever do that? Yes, you did. You certainly did. Anyway, some of us did, just because you wouldn't get out of the house like that, but you kind of, I don't know why, it was really uncomfortable. Anyway, I became a little bit like that in this small group. I just bought shorter and shorter skirts to wear, just because I found him so annoying. Anyway, so we're both Christians, we're leading this group together. Why did they put us together? I do not know. And we definitely did not, apart from the skirt rolling, which I did do to annoy him. But apart from that, we really didn't go out of our way to, because we had new Christians in the group. So we were trying to be helpful and inclusive and see what we thought. But we obviously had very different sort of understanding, really, of God and how God works and how God helped us, etc., etc. And after about 6 weeks, one of the new Christians said, I don't want to be rude, but are you sure that you're both actually Christians? Is it the same faith you believe? Because it's so different, and I'm really muddled. So that didn't really work so well. She did stay a Christian, actually, which I don't know. A few years later, he actually attended an event which John was leading, and there was a time of ministry, and he had actually quite a powerful experience, a physical experience of the Spirit, through which he kept saying, but I don't believe this, I don't believe this, I don't believe this, which I found so amusing anyway. Gave me deep joy when I heard about it. So, anyway, going back to the passage, I think when we read this passage, and particularly his understanding of salvation, for those of us who read other books in the Bible, and particularly Paul, we kind of go, really? What? Hang on, are we talking about, is this the same faith? How does it work out with salvation and faith and works? And, what's that about? This feels really different, and it does feel really different. I would say James and Paul have quite different takes on all of those issues. And of course, one of the reasons for the diversity, if you like, is nothing was actually written down at this stage. So they are trying to work out, the early church is trying to work out what happens now. You know that if for those of you who've had a baby and you leave hospital, and the midwife's just kind of waving you off, and you just think, well, what do I do now? And they just go, well, go home. But I have no idea what I'm doing. How is so irresponsible to let me walk off with this baby? And you have that feeling of I'm winging it. I don't know about you, but parenting largely feels like winging it right from that point up to currently now. So, we're trying to work it out as we go along. And the early church was absolutely trying to do that. They were trying to, they knew that Jesus had come as the promised Messiah for the Jewish people. Many of them would have continued to revere the Jewish law and to follow its precepts, all of its laws. And one of the first problems they faced was to answer the question, was Jesus simply a Messiah for the Jews? Was he was it simply for the Jewish people, God's chosen people, that God had come to save and redeem? Or could it go wider? Now, Paul being Paul, gets converted and just goes and starts converting Gentiles and doesn't really care about the details or the whys or the wherefores. And so they have to kind of do this process of working out, well, what do we do with Gentiles? Do they get included? And there's this whole, if you read the beginning of Acts, there's this process. They genuinely don't know what the right thing to do is. What's the answer? We don't know. And then gradually they kind of come and they see that God seems to be converting people. He's filling them with his Spirit. They're wanting to be baptized. And so they can't really argue. So it feels like, this expansion is probably of God. But it's this extending, and it wasn't necessarily very obvious. So once you've done that, then what do you do with the law? Because the rest of us are all happily following the law. But what do we do with these people? Because they're not Jewish. So should they be following the law with all its precepts? Or should they be kind of free? And does that mean we're creating another kind of, sect or whatever? So there was a lot to work out. It's actually quite complicated. Some thought that the new Gentile converts should pretty much comply with everything in terms of the old law. Others, such as Paul, thought that's ridiculous, that they obviously don't have to adhere to it. And you can see these meetings in Acts when they're trying to work out what they should do. In Acts 15, James is one of the people who negotiates a compromise position, which Paul then goes on to completely ignore. But from this letter, and from generally the story of Acts, we can see that for James was, the law was incredibly important to him. The Jewish faith was incredibly important to him. So he revered it in a much stronger way than I think Paul, who kind of saw it as a kind of something that he'd really moved away from. So verse 21 to 24, was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled. Abraham believed God, it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see, a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. And what we know in stark contrast is in Hebrews, or to be honest, most of the Pauline letters, that Paul is saying, no. It is our faith that saves us. We come to Jesus and we need saving. It is not what we do. We cannot work our way up to being acceptable to God. And Paul would say, and I should know, because you know what? I really tried to do it that way. So, Paul, having been a Pharisee and having done all the things that he did, he was holier than holier. He was righteous, he did that, and he saw that it mattered nothing in terms of God. So Paul kind of really wants to discard the whole lot and focus on, no, it is faith, out of which come our actions, but it is faith that saves you. So there's sort of a spectrum between the law is great over here, and the law simply serves to condemn us over there. And sola fide, it's all on faith, and actually works are really quite important too. And we would put sort of Paul and James on quite different ends of those spectrum. I'm going to talk in a second about what I think the middle way for us is. But I think, for me, one of the really important things is actually fantastic that they're both there. That they're both in the New Testament. That there's a different take. James has his own story, he has his own life experience, and he has his own interaction with God, and this is what he feels he kind of wants to spotlight. Meanwhile, Paul has his. And I always think when you listen to the early morning radio, if a government or someone else is kind of in trouble, and they send people out to kind of give the party line, and you hear people saying the same phrases. You can always tell that something is going horribly wrong because the situation is so difficult and so tense and so complex that we have to stick to this very tight script, which we cannot divert from, because if you divert from it, then, all hell is going to break loose. And the Bible and God is not like that. God is bigger than that. The Bible is bigger than that. The Bible, and I don't actually know all the conferences that they got to describe. I'm sure Phil Hoyle would, but you can ask him afterwards. But, there was a process by which they decided which of these letters were going to be included in the New Testament. And they chose to put them both in. And they're really quite different. So God is not a controlling spin doctor. And he allows, Jesus, James, Jesus' brother, and Paul, probably the chief theologian in terms of the early church, to express and to have it written down really quite different and divergent views. Because God is big enough to hold those things together, and that is okay. And actually, both those perspectives, if you like, or the way of looking at it is actually quite interesting and tells us something different. And if we just went for this tiny sort of tight sort of whatever, then we lose something of the understanding. So I would say the middle way, the older you get, the more you get interested in the middle way, is that it goes something like this. The middle ground, holding those two understandings of faith, salvation, etc. together. I would say we are saved by our faith in Jesus alone. It's through faith that we come into relationship with Jesus through his saving work on the cross. If you look at all the songs we sang this morning, it wasn't, thank you, Jesus, that I can work really hard so you can accept me. Those are not the tones of the songs. They are about salvation. They are about God coming in and rescuing us. We all need saving. We cannot save ourselves. There was doing the rounds yesterday was some quotes from Matthew Perry, who's the Friends person. His life story. He's just written a book. And Pete, I'm trusting this to Pete Gregg. So if this is wrong, blame Pete, because it was on my social media and he put it on there. So I trust Pete Gregg, so I think it's fine. And he's talking about his struggle with addiction. He says this: "God, please help me," I whispered. "Show me you're here. God, please help me." I started to cry. I really started to cry. That shoulder shaking, kind of uncomfortable weeping. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because for the first time in my life, it felt okay. It felt safe, taken care of. Decades of struggling with God and wrestling with life and sadness, all of that was being washed away. Like a river of pain gone into oblivion. He goes on to talk about how this encounter gave him a kind of an idea of what life could be like. And he says this: "He turned me into a seeker, not only of sobriety and truth, but also of him." So at the point that he prays that prayer, and as I say, really don't know about the process, but at the point he prayed, he has got nothing. He's just asking for God to come. And that's the point. That's the point of salvation, if you like. We know that I come with nothing. I come with nothing, and you need to help me, and you need to save me, because you know what? I cannot work my way up to this. And that is the extraordinary Christian claim, isn't it? That when we come with whispering those words, often at the absolute end of ourselves, that God meets us in the midst of the pain and the mess and the unworked out stuff, and he comes and he meets us there. But, and this is where the James perspective comes in, by coming into relationship with Jesus through faith, we open ourselves to being transformed by the Spirit. And this is the James challenge. And the body without the Spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. It's actually very helpful. We should not be the same people that we were when we were first blinded by his grace. That saving faith needs to be played out in your deeds. And if it isn't, we want to just be curious about what's going on there. Why am I stuck here? Why is this quite difficult for me? Why do I feel like I'm in the same place? Now, that is not an opportunity to sort of berate ourselves, but it's not a terrible thing to think, because you know what? God is good and he loves you, and you can come to him and say, I feel really stuck. I feel like I'm going around the same circle. And we can invite God in and we can ask him. But we know that, it's a good perspective to have. It's a good thing to look at. So Paul is right. We're saved by faith alone. But James is right that this real life-changing faith is going to be accompanied by actions. I don't know if you saw the interview with Louis Theroux and Stormzy, and he was talking about Stormzy was talking about how lockdown had meant he hadn't got anything to do, or not much to do, and so he really drew closer to God. And it's a really good interview. If you want to watch it, you can find it. You can find it. And he just talks about this process in relation to his dad. And he had we had no relationship with his dad, actually. So his dad had kind of left the family when Stormzy was very young. And the first time his dad then got back in contact with him was when Stormzy had become successful, and he asked him for money. And so this is, not only have you basically not been in my life, you have now compounded that by basically, all you want is my money. You don't want a relationship with me. You've never wanted a relationship with me. You just want my money. And so he talks about how angry he was. We might say righteously angry. That, he was really mad at his dad about that. And then he talks about how the process of drawing closer to God, he began to see, well, yeah, I've messed up too. I've messed up in this way, and I've messed up in this way. And I am receiving God's grace. I'm, you know the song. You saved me, you rescued me. So that means that everyone probably needs rescuing. And that might just include my dad. And it's this kind of process. And it's not a finished process, because at the time of the interview, I'm not sure he'd actually met up with him again. But you could see that by drawing close to God, that was transforming him, and that relationship was being transformed as Stormzy understood what grace meant, and as he then looked out. So as he got the message of Paul, and then he looked out and thought, what does that mean for my relationship with my dad? Should that have an impact on my relationship with my dad? And I think that's just it was a really powerful a reflection on how it works with God. So Stormzy's not putting his relationship with his dad right because he feels he ought to. He's doing it because he knows that God loves him, and that gives him space, that gives him the freedom to come in and actually extend that grace to his dad. So we're going to pray now. Let's stand.